Good Monday morning. I've got news for you that I know probably very few of you are aware of. It's going to be a shocker. Um, did you know that in the United States of America, there is a presidential election tomorrow? Did you know this? You did? You knew? Yeah, I don't know how you would ever know that there was such a thing. Um, we just moved to Georgia. I think I've shared this before. And apparently Georgia is a swing state because the only commercials we have at this time are pharmaceuticals, which I've really discovered how many pharmaceutical commercials there are for the drugs that help you and the side effects that will harm you, um, and presidential candidates. Those are the only two advertisements we see. I did actually see a Reebok advertisement and Progressive Insurance because they have really funny commercials that I do remember. But yes, there is a presidential election tomorrow. And you don't need another message on what you need to do because we're all adults in the room and probably a lot of us have our minds made up. But I did want to speak to those of you that don't really want to vote. I can understand you look at your offerings and they're not maybe what your heart would want, because a lot of us go by our emotions in moments like these, and we want somebody that our heart gravitates towards. But I have learned through the years, especially as a believer, follower of Christ, that sometimes we wish that we could get a candidate where we could govern the salvation of the human heart. And I wish there was a law we could pass that would say everyone has to give their heart to Jesus, and but that would kind of negate the free will Jesus gave us all, right? But I've just learned you can't govern heart transformation. That's why you have people that create churches and ministries and share Jesus on little videos on Monday morning, because they're just called to that. Or you have teachers who share it with your children in a classroom, or the lady down that does your hair talks to you about Jesus. It's not something you govern. Only Jesus can change the human heart. But there are things that you can govern. One of my pastoral mentors had a wonderful series recently about the government and the church, and he talked about the number one aspect being protection. And that feels so congruent with how I see this play out. And there are things that are important when you have been placed in a land. And Acts 17:26 is very specific in saying that we have been placed in a particular moment of time, and we have been placed in a particular boundaries. And I think about that often in my own life. I don't know if you ever wonder, some of you may not be from America, but it's like, God, why did you choose to put me at this moment of time in this location and in this place? And so for whatever reason, for those of us living in America, God's placed us here, and he has placed us here at this moment in time with these two candidates to choose from. And I was thinking the other day of what does it feel like are the most important things when it comes to the land that you live in. And I know for me on a personal level, when I feel like my safety, like my personal safety is potentially in jeopardy, or when I get afraid, I move towards safety. It's like, how can I keep myself safe? But when I think about the responsibility of a government for a nation, it feels like their most important responsibility is to keep us safe. And for whatever reason, I always think about that message that comes over the airplane right before you take off. They're giving you all the instructions. And they tell parents, they say, put on your oxygen mask first. Because, like, a passed out parent can't put the oxygen mask on the child. And I've thought about that so many times during this election. What does it look like? What is needed for America, who has probably the most giving, wide open heart of a nation? What does it look like for them to be able to help someone else? Well, it might look like they need to put on their oxygen mask first, so that they don't end up drowning in a place where they really can't help people that are in need of help. When you have a nation that's drowning in debt, you really can't do much, because Scripture says a borrower is slave to the lender, and that's very true. And if you want to help people and have immigrants and people that come into your nation that you can love and care for, then you have to figure out how you're healthy first. And I don't think that is selfish. I don't think that is unkind or unloving. I think that's wise first. So I think about that. How does my nation put on its oxygen mask first? So what does protecting us there look like? And then I think, how do you protect the most vulnerable? The ones that cannot protect themselves. And there's no one more vulnerable than children. So for me, when I'm going to vote, and you can vote however you want, I'm just trying to give a perspective to those who don't want to vote, that there is value in going into the voting booth. And so one of the questions I ask myself, because I read both platforms, I want to be well versed and educated, and I want to ask, who's going to protect my children? We as parents, that's our number one priority. We do everything we can to keep our kids safe, but you also want to live in a place that is going to protect your children and protect your right to protect your children. I don't think any of us who are parents want to have someone else telling us what we can and can't do for our children, the ones God has entrusted to us. So that's really important when I place my vote. And kids are exceptionally under assault today in ways I don't think we've ever seen. And I think part of it is, I'm not saying it hasn't always been there, but I think sometimes it's like the curtain's pulled back and we can really, really see what's going on towards our children. So protecting our children is really important. And I find it interesting that in Scripture, there are two major times that children were annihilated. during the time of Moses, children under 2 were killed, and at the arrival of Jesus, children under the age of 2 were killed. And I always, I think there's something in that to pay attention to when we have our children so jeopardized. And as a Christian, you know, anybody knows that a Christian just looks at abortion and they see 2 people instead of 1. And it's not that as a woman I would want anybody telling me how to handle my health care. But once you have 2, it's no longer the choice about 1. And I hear people say often, well, I don't want a Christian perspective. If I'm not a Christian, I don't want a Christian perspective dictating what I do with my body. Well, I can appreciate that. That's okay. But as a Christian, that's just where our heart lands. And so when I vote, that's going to be a dictator in how I vote. Who is going to protect children from conception to their growing up years the most? Because that feels like that's a government's responsibility to protect us. And the other thing for me as a believer that's really important is how my nation responds to Israel. Not that I don't want my nation to be, to care about other nations. Of course I do. But as a follower of Christ and someone who believes in Genesis 12, when the Lord spoke to Abraham and he said, I'm going to make you into a great nation, and those who bless you I will bless, and those who curse you I will curse. It's very important to me that my nation is an ally in the greatest sense of the word with the nation of Israel. So that feels like safety to me. And then the final thing that is so important to me is the safety of my ability to teach the word of the Lord. And you only get that when you are able to talk freely, which all of these are embedded in the Constitution of our nation, that our founding fathers somehow had divine foresight to, in a world that looks so different, realize their value. Because without free speech, without the freedom of people to be able to comment on here and tell me they don't agree with me, or tell me they don't want my biblical perspective framing their world, without their ability to do that, then you remove my ability to share the faith that God has given me, and I don't want that taken away. So free speech is so important. And, you know, we all hear things we don't like, but to regulate that, to have someone sitting in a little room and determine what is okay for me to say doesn't feel safe. What feels safe is knowing that my ability to share my faith on any platform, whether media or a physical platform in a church on a Sunday morning, is never in jeopardy. And that means your freedom of speech won't be in jeopardy either. So, yeah, I feel like a government's primary role is to keep us safe. And we all have different perspectives of what that looks like. So instead of negating a vote or not voting because no candidate feels palatable, what if you gave yourself a different framework and looked at it as a citizen of America? What does safety and protection look like? And who will protect the things that I value the most? So those are the categories in which I personally, as vulnerable as I can share with you, walk into a voting booth. I don't walk in there to hope either one of those candidates will delegate salvation, because it's not possible. And it's the responsibility of the church, not the government. But I do want a government that will keep me safe.